Hello S3. This week we're going to be considering plot and planning out our big ideas so that we're ready when the time comes to write our own stories. If you have a look at the marking tag on this slide, I've circled the 3 statements that I think are especially relevant this week. They're all to do with structuring our story, the narrative voice or perspective we tell the story from, and that we are making links into the genre through our plot as well. So this week you are just going to be focusing on planning your story out, the main plot points, and we'll have a think about clever ways to do that to engage with your audience. A really simple and effective tool that I like to use for creative writing is the story mountain structure. I think it's great because it has 5 plot points. It's great for a short story because you might decide that those 5 plot points are going to be roughly a paragraph long. The short story that you end up writing will be approximately 1,000 words long, so it'll be a couple of sides of A4 paper. My advice to learners is always to begin with the climax, which you can see here in the middle of the story mountain. The reason that this is a good idea is it means that your opening and build-up can then foreshadow the problem or the dilemma that your characters will face in the climax of the story. I know that lots of people say to me they like to just write and get on with it and they don't enjoy the planning process. But if we slow ourselves down and are really thoughtful during this planning process, then you end up with a story that is a lot more clever and ultimately will get you more marks when it comes to being graded for the folio in S4. Once you've figured out what the big problem is that your characters will face in the climax, you're then going to have to decide how to resolve and to end the story. Remember that you don't need to wrap everything up neatly. We don't need every story to end with a happy ending. But it's really important that you answer some of your readers' questions so they have a sense of satisfaction by the end of this journey that you have taken your characters and your readers on. Over the next 3 slides, you're going to find 7 keywords or techniques that will be helpful this week and in the following weeks as we play around with creative writing and plan your story. Take some time to read through the list of 7 keywords and techniques. Make some notes if you want to, because we'll be coming back to these, using them to evaluate some openings that already exist from successful authors. And then I'd like you to plan ahead for how you will use some of these techniques in your own writing when you complete the task for this week, the main task, which is to create a plan of your own. Now that we've spent some time considering the climax and completing some tasks around that, the next thing that I want us to consider is how to create an effective opening. The opening should establish your key characters, setting, and also genre. I want you to make sure that you've got in front of you the notes from last week on the 7 elements of historical fiction. You are going to use these to help you to evaluate a couple of openings from published novels. I want you to think about what is established or introduced in the first few paragraphs and make some notes on that, please. Here is the second opening that I want you to evaluate. Read through it and referring back to the 7 elements of historical fiction, can you make some notes again on how this writer has established setting, character and genre? When I was planning this week, I looked into the writer Colson Whitehead, who penned The Underground Railroad. You've now read the opening of that novel, and I want you to spend some time looking through his thoughts and considerations that took place during his planning process. He outlines them here. I really like that in order to build credible characters and to conduct some of that world building that we've spoken about, he really thought about their trauma and how they would act realistically instead of just being pulled into some of the caricatures that he was used to seeing other people write about in this genre. So instead of just accepting those, he thought about himself and considered how the people would really feel so that he could try to build realistic characters. And at this point, I just want to draw your attention to one of the quotes that I introduced you to last week. The past is another country. They not only do things differently, they think about things differently. So if you want to create believable, thoughtful characters, you need to try to get under the skin of them. And part of that will come through some really thoughtful research and also slowing down and considering these things during the planning stage so that you don't miss it when you come on to writing. Here are some final considerations before we come on to actually planning. Once you've chosen your era, event or character from history, you're going to also need to decide on a time frame and a perspective. On this slide, I've included some details about 2 really famous novels that are taught in schools. One is called Private Peaceful by Michael Morpurgo, and it focuses on World War I. The second is The Boy in the Striped Pyjamas, which focuses on the Holocaust that took place at the time of World War II. I want you to have a read through the notes that I've made on each of these, and then consider what impact the time frame and the perspective that you choose will have on your story. Before you start writing your plan, read the instructions on this slide, including the challenge. On the next slide, I'm going to walk you through how to plan using the Story Mountain Planner. I have decided to build a plan for a story around the witch trials that took place in Scotland. I included some factual information in our slides last week about this historical event, and I think it would be a really interesting one to write on because it's often overlooked. Lots of people don't know the ins and outs of what was happening to women in that era in Scotland, and the fact that there were more deaths and more torture upon Scottish women than there were in most countries around the world. Again, that's not something that I necessarily looked into or learned much about when I was at school. So I think it could be a really interesting time to do my research into. And I think there could be lessons that I could teach my reader by telling a story of a young girl that was tortured in this way. So I've decided to set my story in Edinburgh. You'll see that in the opening, I'm making some notes on where and when this was set. And I've also had to think about who my main character is. Going on to the build-up, I'm thinking about an event that could foreshadow the climax. I'm thinking about an event that would establish some of the thoughts and feelings of our main characters and what they see on a daily basis. So it would be really interesting, I think, to have her watching another accused witch being tortured, but also bringing the audience's attention to the fact that Mary, our young character, is in a dilemma herself. So have a read through some of my ideas for the build-up and how that could start to make our reader worry about the main character, Mary. For the climax, I'm thinking that Mary needs to be found out, but I'm not sure yet how that's going to happen. When you're planning your own story, it's totally fine for you to have some gaps at this stage. We can come back once these kind of ideas fall into our mind and add some detail to the plan. So I'm thinking Mary's found out, she's pregnant, she's out of wedlock, and she's pregnant by a man who is already married. So the accuser of witchcraft is going to be that married man. He's going to accuse her of witchcraft to protect his own reputation. And because of the culture at the time, that would be accepted because of his social standing maybe. And the wife would go along with that story to protect her good Christian reputation too. So then Mary is going to be tortured so that the town, can prove whether or not she is a witch. So that's my idea so far. Then I need to think about how to resolve this problem, this dilemma. She's our main character, so I don't necessarily want her to perish. And it would be quite nice to build in some pace, some adventure for our reader as well. So if you have a look at what I've decided so far for the resolution, she's going to be in a prison cell, but she's going to escape. I'll try to make it not too much like Prison Break, not too full of action, but focusing on the thoughts and feelings and tension for our character. So I think she could be hidden in some kind of vehicle, and then to build tension, she'll feel like she's going to be caught out. So it can't be too smooth sailing, it can't be too straightforward. So somebody, maybe a policeman, will stop the vehicle, and for a moment, Mary and the reader are going to worry that she will be caught and that she will be burnt at the stake for being a witch and for trying to evade that fate. I'm going to use some short sentences in this section to increase the pace and build tension for the reader. But essentially, I want her to be able to carry on with her journey and get away from Edinburgh and get away from the witch trials. So the ending is going to be quite a happy ending, but I'm not going to tie everything up too neatly. I would just like it to be that she arrives at her destination. Maybe include a description here of the nature, the fresh air, the openness that she's surrounded by now, which will contrast with the opening which was set in Edinburgh, which was maybe dirty and busy, and will contrast also that sense of burning that she was afraid of. The themes that I'm going to touch upon in my story are injustice, unfairness, misogyny, and freedom. And I'm thinking for a motif, a pattern, I might keep returning to the image of her pregnant stomach, just to highlight the injustices that were against women primarily at the time of the witch trials. Now that I've given you lots of information, there is a challenge there for you to think of a way that you might be able to upgrade the structure of my story. So this is in the basic, straightforward story mountain, which I think is effective. But is there a way that we could tell this in an even more interesting way? Maybe starting at a different point and then telling the rest of the events through a flashback. So before you come on to writing your own plan, have a little think, is there a way that we could change the structure of this story ever so slightly to make it even more interesting for our reader?